Thank you for participating in the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. This panel is co-presented by Leeway Foundation and Temple University Department of Theater, Film, and Media Arts. The runtime for this panel is 90 minutes, including audience Q&A, so please leave your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to engage with them. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStarFest and use the hashtags BSFF21 and hashtag BlackStar10. Don't forget to fill out our audience evaluation and don't forget to vote for your favorite films. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2021 BlackStar Film Festival.
Good evening and welcome to the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. I'm Farah, the panel producer, and it's truly my pleasure to introduce the really brilliant people assembled for this conversation tonight. Our co-moderators are Deborah Thomas and Krystal Strong. Krystal Strong is a scholar, organizer, whose research and teaching focus is on activism and the cultural and political power of youth and the role of educational spaces as sites of political struggle. Her research values oral history and storytelling, and she's a proud member of the BLM Philly chapter and producer of the film By Your Side. Deborah A. Thomas is an anthropologist, filmmaker, and scholar of the Caribbean and other in-between spaces, whose work on diaspora, state violence, and legacies of harm and repair open new lines in our thinking about affect, liberation, and cultural production. Her award-winning books include Political Life in the Wake of the Plantation, Sovereignty, Witnessing, and Repair, and Exceptional Violence, Embodied Citizenship in Transnational Jamaica. Thomas co-directed and co-produced the documentary films Bad Friday and 4 Days in May. And prior to Thomas's life as an academic, she was a professional dancer with the New York-based Urban Bush Woman. Mike Africa Jr. is an activist, writer, and the host of the podcast On a Move with Mike Africa Jr. He's the star of the documentary 40 Years a Prisoner and is a stage performer and keynote speaker and hip-hop artist. Mike was born in Philadelphia in a jail following a police raid on his parents' home. That raid killed many of his family members, his uncle and his cousin, and 9 others. At the age of 13, he began working to free his parents from prison, and after 25 years of struggle with the help of his family and the attorney Brad Thompson, Mike got his parents out of prison at age 40. Louis Massiah is a documentary filmmaker and the founder of Scribe Video Center in Philadelphia, a media arts center that provides political production workshops and community-based workshops to groups and emerging independent media makers. As an educator and institution builder, Massiah has developed media production methodologies that assist first-time filmmakers in authoring their own stories, including Precious Places and the Muslim Voices of Philadelphia Community History Project. A MacArthur Genius Foundation fellow, Massiah's documentaries include The Bombing of Osage Ave, written and produced by the inimitable Tony Cade Bambara, and W.E.B. Du Bois, a biography in 4 voices. Maori Karmael Holmes is a curator, filmmaker, and writer. She founded BlackStar in 2012 and serves as its artistic director and CEO. She has organized programs in film at a myriad of institutions, including the Underground Museum and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Her films have screened internationally, including her feature film documentary Seen Not Heard, Women in Philadelphia Hip Hop. And she's also directed and produced works for Color Lines and singer-songwriter India R.E. Her writing has appeared in numerous places, including pleasure activism, the politics of feeling good, and how we fight white supremacy, a field guide to Black resistance. Maori is also the director of the Color Lines film Wilson No Goode and has worked with Mike Africa on his music video for Fly Baby. Ephraim Asili is a filmmaker, DJ, and radio host whose focus on the African diaspora as a cultural force has led him to screen films internationally, all in different settings and festivals. He's served as an instructor and technical director at Bard and at Scribe Video Center. He's the director of The Inheritance. And last, and certainly not least, are Mike Sr. and Debbie Africa Davis, who are political activists, former political prisoners, as well as film directors and producers. Michael and Debbie went from childhood sweethearts, caring for animals, to picket signs, beatings, and arrest, 40 years separated by a prison sentence, to Debbie giving birth to her baby in a jail cell. That baby, Mike Jr., who is on this panel, grew up and came back to free his parents from that prison. Mike and Debbie are the directors of By Your Side. Thank you so much for being in conversation.
All right, so I think this is my cue. I'll just jump right in and sending greetings to everyone who is joining us on the live stream. We have a wonderful panel, wonderful panelists, and not a lot of time to get into a really rich conversation. So let's just get things started. And we wanted to start out this conversation by, first of all, talking about the time and the context for having this panel and also for making these films. And we can't go too far into a conversation about time without recognizing that we are just 2 days away from the 43rd anniversary of the August 8th, 1978 police siege of the Move compound, in which Mike Sr. and Debbie Africa here were arrested as part of the Move 9. We would also be remiss to not acknowledge that there are several people who were present on that day who are no longer with us. And so we'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge the lives of Delbert Africa, Merle Africa, Bill Africa, Consuela Africa, and Sandra Africa. So the MOVE organization, as we know, kind of waxes and wanes and enters and recedes in terms of our public consciousness. And this year, move back into our public conversation. And this is not just something that's happening in this moment, but we know this is something that has happened over time. At different moments, different representations of MOVE are possible and desirable alongside different levels of public support and attention. And here on this panel, we have represented 35 years of MOVE film representation, from the bombing of Osage Avenue in 1986 to By Your Side just this year. And so just to start things off, I'd love to hear from the panelists, and feel free to jump in as you all would like. We'd love for you all to talk about how you understood the time and the context in which you made your films, and how this shaped the kind of representation that you wanted to offer.
All right, well, for me, MOVE has been so misrepresented for decades in the public life. And when we were on the street in the early 1970s, we were just vilified, and with so much vitriol coming our way. And you know, Debbie and I, we joined the organization. We were 18. You know, we were just teenagers. And in fact, I was still in the military. Our goal was to try to help. You know, I wasn't interested really in going to jail or, you know, having those kind of confrontations, but I was interested in being with my family and making sure that we were safe and making sure that others were safe as well. Um, um, the context in which we were telling our story on film is that we knew so much vitriol had been put out and directed at us, and they painted everybody with the same brush. And the portrayal they had of moved people in general was one of, it just wasn't good, you know. So we knew that people did not know us, you know, as they still do not know us, you know. So we wanted to tell our story and put our story forth and let them see what we were about. That's why we chose this film, and that's what we were attempting. And the people who we were attempting to reach by that is the same people who had a negative connotation of move. Some who didn't want to support us for whatever reason, and let them see who we were as individuals. This is not a monolithic organization. You know, we have our own families, we have our own feelings, and we have our own motivations for doing things. So that's why we wanted to do and express our film and put forth our film to for public.
In many ways, the Move organization has been defined for those not in the Move organization by mass media, by, I would actually say, kind of commercial journalistic media, and Move in many ways has been the relationship between Move and governmental structures has really been a very, very central dynamic in so much as of what has happened in Philadelphia from the late 1970s and until today, and it continues. I mean, so many politicians, be they governors or senators or district attorneys, some elections really have been very much shaped by the state's reaction to the Move organization. So, in a lot of ways, the work that Mike and Debbie Africa have done to create By Your Side, which is where they, as part of the Move organizations, or really the subject, are sort of defining the story, is something really quite new. Even if films about the Move organization have been supportive or sympathetic or favorable, the idea of folks who are most affected by this this dynamic, sort of telling the story, is really something quite important. In that, having that voice as part of the discourse really allows us to really think and analyze and sort of understand things in a different kind of way. So very very important and very appreciative that they've created this work.
Please, anyone else from the panel, feel free to jump in.
Ephraim, I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
There you go. Yep.
There we go.
I can hear you.
I started writing my film in 2016, and it's kind of like a hybrid narrative documentary. And at the time, in the middle of the film, I really wanted, in terms of the narrative, for there to be a break where the group of activists are introduced to more experienced activists that kind of make them rethink where they're at with their process. Some time went by while I was writing, and I'd been going back and forth with my actors about different things. And a lot of them, I'm from Philly, so I obviously knew about Move growing up, and I have my own experience um, with Move from my 20s. But a lot of my actors weren't all that familiar, and so it was something we talked a lot about in the process of developing the film. Um, as I got closer to the time where we could shoot the film, I had been in contact with Mike Jr. And around the same time, not long after that, Mike and Debbie were released. I remember, I don't remember exactly where it was, but I was somewhere in Europe, and Mike and I were going back and forth on the phone, and I was telling him about the film, and it all aligned that they were able to come up and be on set with us and relate some of their experience, and kind of following up on what Louis was saying. It's something that for me, it's always a priority if I can in some way facilitate kind of you know a process in my filmmaking where people who are most affected by a situation or right in the middle of it themselves are able to express themselves in their story. And then as kind of like a director, how would that kind of like impact the people that I was working with? And so it's one of those things that sort of aligned in the moment, but had been a sort of there'd been a trajectory like to that point. But with filmmaking, it doesn't really matter. Kind of sometimes if the arc is going a certain way and you want it to land in a certain place, the timing has to be right. And so this was one of those situations where um, the timing had been there. In terms of the media representation related to Move, for me, filmmaking is a very personal matter, and I wanted to depict Move, or at least the way I wanted it to function in the film was kind of how it functioned for me as someone who spent a lot of time around the organization in my early to mid 20s, and so I grew up, with the news media, as a very young person, but my actual experience of knowing people was quite different. And that was always something that stood with me, whether the representations, positive or negative, that I see in the media, they're still different than what my individual perceptions were. And so I was trying to give some voice to that experience that I had in the film. So.
I'd love to pull in Mike Jr. and Maori in particular, because we see in, for example, 40 Years a Prisoner, the context for the film changes in real time in the film, right? Like your mother is released in the process of the filming of the film itself. And certainly with Wilson No Goode, part of the catalyst is this street sign that is erected to honor a mayor who presided over the bombing of Osage Avenue. So it'd be great to hear from the two of you about this kind of context question and how that shaped the work that you created.
Sure. For Wilson No Goode, it was a very short, turnaround process. So I don't feel like I have like a lot of lead up to making it. It was an assignment from Color Lines, and I think we made the film in about 10 days. So it was very much like shooting it, wanting to cover this news event. I was really concerned with making sure. That we presented um, the side of the people, of the activists at the center of the story, and not glossing over, the history, right? So that this didn't go unmentioned. Why? Um, because I think obviously the people wanting to name the street after Wilson Goode were focusing on him being the black mayor, and so wanting to forget, in his words, his one bad day. And so I was just really trying to make sure that we presented something that was. I always feel like saying like objective is not real, but trying to present something that was well rounded, where people could share how they were really feeling about that naming of the street.
Wow. I really like what you just said, Mary, about objective is not real. Um, that probably is something that speaks to me in thinking about 40 years a prisoner. Uh, while things were happening, it was just in real time, really. I mean, for me, there was no way to say what should have been or what could have been or any of that. It was just, we're doing this thing and these things are happening. And so it was kind of like it was unfolding as we were shooting. The plan wasn't to, the plan at the beginning of the shooting of the film wasn't mom's going to get out perfectly timed for this film to be ready, right? It was more like, how can we use this film to bring awareness about who my parents really are? Like, kind of like what Dad was saying about By Your Side. You know, it was more so about showing people who we are and that we have feelings so that people would, you know, be more supportive to help get them out of prison. But as fate had it, they came home and it was impeccable timing. And that's just how it happened. It was magical.
Thanks for that, all of you.
Also, somebody else is speaking. No, go ahead, Deb.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just wanting to say that when Mike speaks about impeccable timing, Debbie and I were at the Church of the Overcome up in Trainer, and we met someone from Philly named Jennifer Bennett, and Jennifer suggested that we somehow she has made some films also, and she suggested that we think about doing that. And she introduced us to Louis Massiah, and Louis graciously let us take a class at Scribe Video Center, and that was, you know, it was a really solid meeting, and he was gracious enough to open his doors to us to learn how the filmmaking process went. And from there, the class project was to start making a film. And that's how that started, man. And, you know, we're forever grateful for the opportunity to do just that, because it set us forth on a road to telling our own story, our own way, about us, about our family, you know, not from somebody else's perspective. And it just do not get any better than that, man. You know, you edit yourself, you produce your own work, you direct your own work, and he gave us the vehicle to do all those things, man. So just want to say thank you to Lord and stuff. And with great help with our son, you know, who, if not, we would have been doing it from behind a wall somewhere, you know. So
and the whole Scribe family took us under our wing.
And then I called Krystal and said, "Yo, my dad and my mom asked me to do this thing. Can you help me?"
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. So
yep, from
yeah,
there
don't want to forget about Krystal's contribution and that effort.
I mean, what you're showing us all is that it's all about the networks, the relationships, the support of a community, and I think that comes out so strongly in each of the films as well. In part because they have a mission, right? Each film has its own mission, and Mike Sr., you talked about this a little bit, and a couple of you hinted at this in different ways, but we really wanted to ask you all also explicitly about audience, right? As filmmakers, we always have an audience in mind, and that's because we have a sense of the mission. You know, we have a sense of what we want our films to do for different audiences that we can imagine engaging with these films. So we wanted to ask you to talk about this from your own experiences. You know, who did you have in mind? Who were you prioritizing when you were making the film? And what work did you want these films to do? And do you see this, especially in your case, Louis, do you see this as changing over time? Do the audiences change over time? Does the mission not shift in a wholesale way, but do you see it taking a different shape due to the different moments? So if you could all take a minute to sort of reflect on the ways you're thinking about audience, I think that would be really interesting for people to hear.
I am going to answer your question, but I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, Mike and Debbie made the film, and Mike Jr. definitely was there, kind of guiding them and helping them in part of the process. And I know Krystal was a really, really important voice. And I also have to say that Maori, in creating a platform where we can show the work and creating a platform where discussions that really affect the broad community can happen are so extraordinarily important. So I'm very, very grateful. And I know Farah has disappeared, but Farah, who put this panel together, I really thank her. And of course, Ephraim has been, part of Scribe, and we're so very, very proud of his work. And Deb, in the institution, you're making this major institution responsible. So anyway, Mutual Admiration Society. I in some ways, I don't think of The Bombing of Osage Avenue, a film I made in 1986, as a MOVE film. And I when people say, "Oh, you made a film about MOVE," I say, "No, that's not what I made a film about. I made a film about state violence bombing a African American community." In the film, which was a collaboration with Tony Cade Bambara, we were not trying to define the MOVE organization. There are members of MOVE who are in the film, and the events sort of centered on the MOVE house and family, but it also affected the broader community. So it really was looking at this history, of state violence, and we don't make it as a journalistic film. We go back to the Lenape, this land, and we talk. That's why. That's the context of it. And then we look at all these examples of state violence so as a way of trying to come to some understanding. For us, the audience was the community, and I'll say largely the African American community, trying to come to some understanding and some analysis. And it's actually related to Wilson Goode, the film that Maori made, in that most folks that I know, including myself, voted for Wilson Goode. We wanted a Black mayor in 1983. But we also knew that what had happened on that day, and all the things leading up to that day, were wrong, and not things that this was not what we put a Black man in office for. And in some ways, seeing this as beyond Wilson Goode, that it really was about, the C4 and Tovex came from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, came from the federal government. That helicopter came from the state police. It was not just, it was a coordinated action of the state, and really trying to understand that and how that was impacting an African American community. So we were trying to find some kind of analysis that the African American community could have to begin to understand why this event had occurred. So yes, so that's why we don't try to define MOVE. That wasn't the purpose of the film. It really was to look at this act.
Ephraim, I wonder if you could jump in because you sort of hinted at what the work of that film was in terms of putting younger activists in dialogue with older or more experienced activists. I wonder if you can also talk a little bit about the audiences you envision
Sure.
for the Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I'd like to also backtrack a little bit and continue with the sentiment from before, and that, this panel is very intimately connected in different ways, and that, I also got my start in many ways at Scribe Video Center, and my interest in making film came from being in West Philly in a community of activists where so many people that I knew were going over to Scribe and taking these classes, and I was always kind of like looking over their shoulder and being like, oh, I think I could do that, you know. And so then I ended up, going to film school and then eventually working at Scribe, which is where I was when I was making some of my earlier films. And so, and when I left Philly, there wasn't, unfortunately, a lot happening in film. And so to be on this sort of 10th anniversary of BlackStar all this time later is really quite amazing, in my opinion. So yeah, Maori, everyone, it's great. And Mike and Debbie, it's like really great what's happening here. But in terms of audience, I started out truly looking at film as an activist, as a vehicle for communicating around some of the stuff that was going on. And I was, this was the mid 2000s, and I thought to myself, what these people that I see who are learning this software are doing, this is the future. These flyers that we're handing out and all of that is going away. Like, I totally picked up on that in the moment, but decided to go to film school. And somehow when I was in film school, I became kind of obsessive about the medium as an art form and the form itself, how the information is presented as opposed to what it is sometimes. And so, I spent a lot of time making experimental, what people call experimental films. And then I had the opportunity to make a feature, which for me, in the spirit of experimentation, was kind of like an opportunity to think about audience in a way that I'm bringing different audiences maybe into one film. So I already sort of had kind of somewhat of a following in experimental film. So I knew that the formal experimentation would go one way. And so wanting to have sections where people like, Mike and Debbie are able to kind of have a very clear platform where the film is quite clear, brings in maybe another audience, and then having a completely dramatic element, maybe another. And so for me, I'm never really trying to think about, audience in terms of how many people, the volume of people, but maybe different types of people getting into to one place and talking or watching the film. And then, I would add to that maybe another preoccupation I had. It's less about audience than my sort of concern with the films being interesting down the line, And so, when we look at a film like The Bombing of Osage, and what Louis was saying about the of which the story is set up and how you look at it, well, that opens it up to a timelessness as opposed to this very hot sort of reaction to a thing. And I think that really, it's not really something directly related to audience, but I think it has a big impact because it's like you're thinking also maybe about audiences 10, 20, 30 years later as well, as opposed to, just a quick flash in the pan. And so for me, all of that's kind of going into the mix when I'm trying to, kind of give representation to something. But it was an experiment for me, and it definitely exceeded what my expectations in terms of different types of audiences and also volume. So that was kind of like it's been a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
Well, I remember that question you asked, Deb. I remember Louis asked us that same question when we started the class. I think it was on the first night, and we were a couple weeks behind because of just different challenges that we face. So he worked hard to try to catch us up to where the class was at, and he asked us that question: what kind of audience would we want to reach? And at the time, we didn't even have an inclination of, what that even meant for me anyway, because we knew nothing about filmmaking. So we talked about what audience we wanted to reach, which were basics, our families, our families, our blood families, and also people from where we come from, so that they could not only see the injustice, but more so about our personal story and how we were actually we were just caught in the middle of two like really forces that just would not compromise. And so our starting out our life, we just wanted to live our life, together normal. But things happened and it caused other things to happen. And so we ended up and move. But the audience that we want to reach were mostly our families so that they could also see, um, so that they could see something that wasn't painted by the news media, and so that they would really understand that we did really have a purpose. But now when I look at it too, I think the film can reach all types of audiences, especially in my view and in my vision and in my experience. I think it needs to reach people, especially in activism, because it's so, it what we went through and what a lot of people go through, you really can't even put it into words, especially when you're dealing with your children, and especially when they're young, they're babies or born in prison like Mike was, and not having parents. That's something that people will look at our film and maybe focus on a love story, but it's not just that. And this is the point at the end of our film when you hear Mike talk about it. This is not just a love story about us. This is about our children. This is about our family, and this is about the trauma that they have gone through. And we don't want people's children going through that. We don't even want our own going through that. So it was just so many levels and so many um just so much stacked up um feelings and emotions and messages that we wanted to give in just like a short 15 minutes. But yeah, I think that this film should actually reach a lot of different people on a lot of levels, on different so-called classes of people, because it is very impactful, and it applies to people who are in activism. It applies to people who may make makes you think, especially if you delve deeply into it and think 40 years is a long time, so it's a lifetime for my child. It's a lifetime for me being separated. It's a lifetime you know, um, for people being apart, so I also want to thank everybody too personally, from, from, uh, from, Miss Bennett to Louie to everybody, to Krystal, to Mike, to Leeway Foundation, and to
Maori.
Maori. And the director's brunch was just awesome. It was just everything. It just seemed everything was perfect, like down to the food and everything. And I've never been there, nothing like that. So I was very, very impressed, and all the organization at Farah and um, all the other people did, and it was really, really amazing, really amazing.
Maori or Mike, do you want to add anything?
Sure, I'll add something. For me, the target audience was, honestly, it was anybody that loves love. Just like, when I think about my parents' story and their experience being separated for 40 years through prison, and then to see them fall back into each other's arms the way they did when they saw each other, that to me, breathtaking. And I think that anybody that has any heart, any love in them, even if it's a small amount, they will be moved by that. And I think that it's an inspiration. I also had a like I guess a fantasy that people in their age category would really, really, it would resonate with them. There's statistical information that show marriages lasting longer from their generation. And I think for people of that at their age group, to see that this love lasted throughout all of this time and throughout all this adversity, I think it would really warm their hearts. And so, yeah, I mean, what can you say? Like, there are no words to describe how powerful that bond is. And so much tried to break it apart and failed. And, you know, anybody that believes in love, anybody that maybe if you don't believe in love, after watching this and seeing what what these people went through and how they maintain and how they are with each other, man. When I look at my dad, how he look at my mom, like it's funny. Like when he said talking to Deborah, he said Deb, and it wasn't talking to my mom. It felt real weird. Like, wait a minute, hold on. So it's just like I know how they feel about each other, and like they give me inspiration to like love better, you know. So anybody that love, that's who should watch this.
Major cosign on that. These are my revolutionary love role models, for real, for real. I don't know if you wanted to hop in, Maori.
No, I don't have anything to add. Okay.
Okay. Well, I wanted to pull on a couple of threads that have been kind of a part of our conversation so far. So, a little earlier, both Mike Jr. and Mike Sr. talked about how they're fit to show a different side of Move than people are accustomed to. And then earlier, Louis, you as well, you talked about your film isn't a Move story. And I think it's telling because for a lot of people, 35 is the Move story. And so part of the question here is really thinking about representation and narrative, right? On the one hand, for a lot of people, the only thing they know about Move, if they haven't seen these films, is May 13th, 1985, or August 8th, 1978. And of course, this is important in telling a story about state violence that we are still struggling and grappling with. But at the same time, what that obscures, what that often prevents us from seeing is the kind of things that Debbie Africa was just talking about, the love, the pain, the trauma, the grief, the good times, the bond that lasted through 40 years of prison. And so I'd love to invite you all to talk a little bit about these stories as counter narratives, and particularly why you chose to tell the stories you told in the way that you told them and what work you were hoping that would do, particularly content is for a lot of people. And to even make this a little more concrete, it'd be really wonderful to hear from you all some of the kind of representational and narrative choices you made in your films around, for example, in By Your Side, we see this beautiful reenactment of, walking up Reno Street to go to Debbie's house. We see, the use of archival footage in really important ways in the film representations. And so would love to hear from you all about this particular question of the counter narrative and what kind of story you hoped to tell and why.
Yeah.
I can start. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, there. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to talk about the music video that Rashid Zakat and I co-directed for Mike Africa's song Fly Baby. And I don't know how much Mike Jr. remembers, but, he came to me, I think 2 years ago with a bunch of ideas. And wearing a producer hat, I kind of like killed all of the dreams. And then he came back, I guess like a year later, and then we started talking about what might be possible and working on another treatment for the video and came up with different ideas. And one of the things that we were really interested in doing, Rashid and I, were because 40 Years a Prisoner had come out just a couple months before, and we knew that people were going to have fresh ideas in their mind about the story and the things that that documentary focuses on. We thought it was really, really important to, of course, as Mike Jr. was sharing, focus on the love story. But also, I really wanted to. I was like, look at these people. They're beautiful, all three of you. And I was like, I want people to focus, like any other music video, focus on how good they look. So we're going to dress them up. I think something Louis told me, Tony K. Bombard said to him a long time ago, that, getting dressed is showing up for the universe. I'm butchering that, but something to that extent. And so I think about that every time I don't feel guilty about dressing up anymore. And so I didn't want to feel guilty about dressing you all very, very finely for this film. I know we bought new clothes. And, I really wanted to show you, we were using the words like royalty and not in a, sort of romantic sense, but really thinking about showing the kind of inner regalness Debbie and Mike Sr., you all definitely possess. You have like a very serious self-assuredness. And we worked with our costume designer and we wanted to like show you off. And so thinking about how people think about activists, and particularly activists of a certain generation, and that being removed from a certain kind of glamour that contemporary activists are very comfortable with, I wanted to have the video have that function to just really present your story, but also, make it just really, really pretty. And I kept kind of coming back to that. Rashid was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want it to be pretty. So we really focused on that.
Oh, it was. Thank you. I had a ball. It was. Oh man, I felt just like you wanted me to feel. Really, it was awesome.
So, I fully understand now why when people go to the podium, they reach into their inside pocket and come out with something they've already thought of and pre-wrote. Because you forget so much and so many people who helped you along the way, and you don't want to exclude anyone. And Maori is another one. So so many people has helped us. That it's really a beautiful thing. So I forgot my original point now. Just saying that. But anyway, it was
We were
a
talking
great
about.
experience all around. Go ahead,
Oh
Krystal.
no, I was just going to see if I could jog your memory. We were talking about narratives and the kind of narrative that you wanted to offer that is different, perhaps, from the larger narratives that surround Move.
Right. So yeah, it's like you ask people what we're about, and it's like we were dropped off out of a spaceship somewhere, man. Like we don't come from families who love us, and we don't come from communities who love us, and that we weren't motivated by the same things that motivate other folks to become involved with activism. And our responses to it is, like different, but it's not. People become activists because they love people, help people because, they have the community spirit in them. And that's all that happened with us. We wanted to help folks. We wanted to share some of our thoughts. And but inside of those, for me, it was a thing about my girl. So, I just wanted to express some things about my girl, my family, and along the way tell a story of how other people are also affected by your choices, which is a critical thing in activism, and if you're going to do one thing, maybe you shouldn't do the other, because other people are adversely affected by your choices. We paid a heavy price for that too. Like I said, we joined the organization at 18. 4 years later, at 22, we were off to do 100 years. And our son was just born. After we were, on trial. Our daughter was left, and two other daughters were left, and they were all little, So these choices that we made affected them in ways too that, so that's why at the end of the film, you say, you hear me say that this is not just a love story. It's about these choices and how they affect others, and within our own community, our own nuclear families, and to the wider community at large. So, we just wanted to tell a brief story, and we wanted to expound it later, to include other issues, but that's something for another time.
I'd love to maybe call on Ephraim in particular, because I think, your film is so different in a lot of ways from the others. And it has this very explicit kind of pedagogical nature to it. Like literally, Mike Jr. appear in the film as like teachers, right? Or educating folks about move. And it'd be great to hear from you around like the choices around that and how you chose to tell the story of the inheritance.
Sure. For me, in the sort of like widest context of making the film, I was writing it at a time when I was seeing a sort of like reemergence of a type of activism that I was deeply involved with, like in the early 2000s. And then it's kind of seemed like a lot of that energy just evaporated. And then suddenly there was a lot happening. And I found myself kind of like looking for the threads and the connections. And then, as time went on, there suddenly became a lot of sort of like representations of activism in the media and commercial media. It became a sort of more popular thing to see, and I found myself thinking like, it reminded me of when I was a kid and I had to go to church in the context of like, the way that people were represented as activists. It was like you had this calling one day, and then you were a straight line to like your cause, and nothing else mattered, right? But anyone who's lived any of it knows that activists have the same complicated lives as anyone else, and they also are that's what makes it beautiful, right? And so I wanted to make a film that related to activism as something that is relatable to many people, just the domestic things that go into to being an activist and that sort of a thing. So when it came time to like kind of work with move in the context of the film again, it was like, at least my theory, sometimes it's always amazing to me, and maybe I'm too close to the story, that I'll go somewhere and you talk, the story of the darker parts of the move story come up and people don't know them. I say, well, how do you not know this? It's like maybe you're not, maybe you don't want to know. Maybe that's part of the choice, especially at this day and age. There's plenty of media out there, but what happens when people are just kind of encounter something, like you turn the corner and this story kind of hits you in the face, and then you have to deal with it. And so I wanted the film to kind of unfold in a way where you might not sit down to watch the film to deal with this particular story, but that it happens in a way. And so it's kind of like the setup is almost like the sort of counter narrative, and then you're forced to kind of like, force is maybe an intense word to use, but then you're in a situation where you have to deal with this other thing. And so for me, in terms of the sort of like pedagogical switch, I wanted to make a very clear distinction between I'm dealing in narrative and a certain kind of thing too. This is something very sort of like serious, in that the people who are speaking are here to teach, which for me was also a counter narrative within how many people would think of move. To be totally frank, I mean, some of the actors, I'm not naming names, were like nervous, like they're going to come in and start yelling. I'm saying, well, it's not going to, be that way in all likelihood. It's like, I know move people. I have met, I've had my own experience here. I'm sure this is going to be great, fine, like relax. And then that was their experience. But and so kind of putting Mike and Debbie in a position where it's just conversational and casual was something that I wanted to do. And it was prior to at least my knowledge of the work that's come out more recently being made. And so at that time, I didn't know of any work in recent history where people in move were able to represent themselves in whatever way they felt fit within, the context of the storytelling was just whatever people had to share, wanted to share. And that was really important to me, that it was like something where I'm not just digging in the archive or asking people what they think about it, but say, okay, let's have a real, hopefully, real, parenthetical in a movie type of interaction. And so for me, the idea of a counter narrative where we're entering our conversation with move in a different way, and then also allowing, or I shouldn't say allow, having a situation that resolves itself with people being comfortable standing up and talking in that way where they are educators.
Great. Did Mike Jr., did you want to add anything? Or?
Sure. I think, for me, the counter narrative is really, really important. I remember reading a book by I don't know, somebody wrote a book about move, and one of the things the person said is no one considered the children. She said no one considered the children, not move and not the city. And I remember calling her on the phone, and then I told her, I said, it's interesting you said no one considered the children. In your writing, you didn't consider the children either. You didn't call us to see how we felt or what we experienced or what was going on with us. So I think that is true across the board, and including in your work. And for me, telling a story that is accurate to who we are, it really doesn't matter how pretty or ugly it is, as long as it's the truth. So, but so much, I mean, and there's enough bad things to say, but they just went and made up something else and just said all this other stuff. So the counter narrative is just so important because it doesn't leave you unprotected. When people make up things about you and about your family, children we really got hurt. And so if the truth was there, even with the bad things that happened in the organization, at least if it was true, it's true. But lies really, really scarred us.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're raising some really important questions and points, and a number of you have touched on some of these issues obliquely or directly. And I wanted to say that I was really struck in watching Louis' film again by Tony K. Bambara's narration at the end of the film. And, I feel that we are in many ways now, as folk were at the time that film was produced, caught between what she says is the hunger for the rhythms and rituals of normalcy and the obligation to struggle against forgetfulness. And for me, I think this obligation for all of us and for all of you in different kinds of ways is an obligation that works on so many different levels. And it's not a unitary obligation either. There are many different dynamics to the ways that we might be accountable to an obligation. And so we just wanted to see if you would talk for a minute or respond to this thinking about, how we come to know what we know, right? New revelations about the organization continue to emerge. We have the revelation around the remains held by the Penn Museum in the city. People are coming forward now to share stories of harm in new ways. And I think when these things happen, it unsettles not only the narratives that we take for granted, but also our memories and framing of the past. And I think it also points out, that there's still so much we don't know and so much that we may never know. And so we were wondering if you would take a minute to talk out loud and maybe talk out loud about how this changes over time as well, but about the kinds of obligations you feel when you're bearing witness to these histories, these experiences, these moments? Can you pinpoint particular choices, particular narratives within your films that for you are attempts to unsettle these shifts in our understanding of the past? And in what ways do you see representational work in relation to a process of accountability? And again, it's a process that really operates at so many different levels. I was hoping that you could share about this.
So, accountability is a really powerful word. And I think that from a personal standpoint and from a social justice and these movements standpoint, it's so important. And to leave any of leave like to elude accountability, I think is very dangerous for the people, for the perpetrators of harm. Because if people aren't, it's like when we talk about this stuff with the city, they drop the bomb or move. The police continue to shoot Black people down in the streets and kill them, kill us. And without accountability, those things don't change. And so, I think that for me, watching this stuff play out is very traumatizing, re-traumatizing. Some of these things that are being said, I remember some of them, not all of it. A lot of the stuff I never heard of before, but I remember these feelings. I distinctly remember they say that the words that's been used a lot is the leadership. I remember being so frustrated with the leadership and them trying to thwart efforts and them trying to force people to do things that people didn't want to do. And many people stood up against these things. I remember having knockdown, drag out fights with people in leadership about decisions they were making that I didn't think made sense. They don't, they do not align with our core values. They do not align with the person's wishes. But, sometimes they wanted to do what they wanted to do for whatever reason. But, as far as these films are concerned, I think it's also important to know that, and not to take anything off of anyone, but also it's important that we've been trying to correct a lot of these issues. Like I said, a lot of these things I never heard of, but a lot of these things we've been trying to correct and have corrected much of it. But people get to the point where they come out and talk about issues and of trauma on their own time. And now here's a time where people want to talk about those things. And I also want to make it clear that I support all of them in getting the healing, and I support them in any way that I can, financially and whatever. And I said this before, and I know I speak for my parents in this. We condemn every act of harm that was done to our people, and we're working on dealing with it now internally too, and publicly. At some point, that's going to happen, but there's a lot to wade through to get to that point.
Yeah, I guess I
If
don't
I could,
mind.
if
So
I could,
most of the
if I could
people,
say, if I could say one more thing, I want to say thank you for that question, because I know it's on people's minds. And I think that, sometimes we get to the point where we don't want to talk about certain things that are uncomfortable because, right now we're talking about love and these amazing things that are happening. And then, in the midst of all of these amazing things, we're on the verge of holding the city accountable for dropping a bomb in a way that's never been able to be done before. And this monkey wrench comes, right? but it's important to deal with these things because one of the reasons we're at this point that we're at now is because they haven't been dealt with. Maybe people have been hidden. Some of these conversations that like people are complaining about these things. A lot of this stuff I didn't know about because people were pulled behind a closed door and said these things, and then, according to the survivors, been threatened, and you can't say anything to anyone. And there's a reason they did that, to hide. And so, to bring this stuff out is the only way that these things can change. So, I really appreciate you bringing that up.
I just want to say too that I think, part of the impetus for the question is not just that, right? It's accountability must operate in the ways that you're mentioning, yes, but I think what this array of films shows so clearly is that it matters who is telling the story and to whom they are telling the story, because that's what can build the complexity, right? As Aisha Shahida Simmons was writing about this set of allegations in particular, we have to understand the anti-Black violence, the state violence, and we also have to hold and understand the forms of abuse that happen. This is not an either-or kind of conversation. And, I think part of the impetus toward accountability and the love with accountability that she has advocated, right, is to be able to create the space for those complex conversations.
Yeah, to follow up on what you're just kind of saying, this idea, or the idea of like building the complexity, and in terms of obligation and accountability. For myself as a filmmaker, something that I struggled with when I was first um, getting going as a filmmaker was representing the complexity that I perceive in situations. So it's like filmmaking tends to teach you to actually make things quite simple for the audience. But what if you keep it complicated? Is always the question, because that's how it feels and that's how it seems. And so for myself, it's a question of, is what I'm making adding to the sort of like complexity of understanding a situation? Is it making things, are we going any deeper, and does it, create things that enable us to understand something in a different way, or, and again, a more complicated way, because everything is complicated. So in those regards, I think that's my obligation to, like, if I'm making something, that I'm not going to try to say, well, they're not going to get it. Therefore, I have to simplify where I'm coming from, so to speak. But that a complex issue can be represented in complex form. And when I sat down to write this film, I was thinking very deeply about the window of time, from 2000, 2005, whatever, a certain window of time, where I had spent a lot of time around Move, and now, I'm in my early 40s. I have, several kids, and I've spent enough time around Move, and I've spent enough time after to know that a lot of what I learned is very valid and important, and I hold dearly. And at the same time, I'm hearing things that are troubling to me, but at the same time, it's impossible to not perceive it with, again, a certain amount of complexity, which is not to, condone anything or anything like that, but just that it's just very complicated situation. But being around at a certain time, what Mike Jr. is saying now, et cetera, certain things one could intuit in certain sort of ways. And so, the sense that within the organization of Move, that it is not monolithic despite public representation, like that's very clear and always has been. And so for me as a filmmaker and kind of dealing with all of it and thinking about the situation, now, again, it's the idea of, um, hopefully making something in terms of bringing it back to film that is able to still be insightful as things change, because everything is changing. And when one is making, one ought to be making with the idea that things could change in the future in that way. And so, it's a sort of impossible thing to like, premeditate and kind of put into a work as far as film. But again, I think the bigger commitment is to kind of hopefully give representation to the complexity of any situation that you're dealing with in terms of representing anyone in the media. Because you never know how things are going to play out, and that everybody's life is complicated, and with such a powerful situation like the history of Move, how could there not be a super complicated narrative, and that plays out in positive and negative ways. So that's what we're kind of dealing with. But just having been so deeply involved in the whole thing, in some ways, again, it's impossible to not see it in a very sort of complex way. And so again, for me, the obligation is to kind of represent complexity as opposed to uh, film as a sort of judgment tool. That
Maori, Louis, do either of you want to jump in?
I'm very conscious that we all are we all have different positions, meaning in relationship to subject, and it's important that so Mike and Debbie have one have very particular position. Mike Jr. has a very particular position. And Deb, I'm going to bring you into this too. I mean, you as a scholar, you have a very particular position, and Krystal and Ephraim and Maori, we all have positions, but the key thing I think is the sense of responsibility to where we are. So one of the things that I see in terms of this issue of accountability, and this issue of counter narrative. From my position, I see that oftentimes the mass media, which oftentimes creates the bulk of the archive, not all of the archive, but the bulk of the archive, and that archive in many ways is what becomes our truth. I see my particular work in making film oftentimes trying to bring new meaning to the archive. Not that the archive, you wanted to destroy the archive, but how do you find the truth in the archive so that it's something useful? I mean, certainly the work that you've done, Deb, is you've done remarkable things with archive, extraordinarily violent archive. But how do you find the meaning in that archive so that the community is stronger as a result of it? Going back to this particular, looking at what's going on now with the Move organization, it does seem to me that both with the remains that are held by the city and the remains that are held by Penn, that it really does feel like that members of the Move organization, if it's useful to them, need to really think about how film could be a tool in taking us to someplace better, and sort of making the situation in someplace better. Similarly, really thinking how can film be, what other things can film do now in sort of as a tool for members of the Move organization and former members of the Move organization. How can it be useful so that they control the narrative going forward?
Well, as I spoke on earlier, that is our attempt. And I've spoken with you, Louis, personally about expounding the film that we had to include some of these other narratives. You might not have been aware of everything that we wanted to express. But I will say, I don't know everybody who, everybody in the organization don't know everybody. We've been away for 40 years. And much of things that have happened, even according to the people who are making, telling their story, when we were away. That's not to say, listen, anything, we felt a long time ago, which was one of our mantras. A revolution starts with self. If there are something that is deficient in your personality, in your makeup, in your thinking that harms someone else, then you need to think about yourself first. Change those things in yourself first. Straighten those things out in yourself first. Now I've dedicated myself to that, and everybody in our family, in our sphere, has made that commitment. So when you see Mike Africa Jr., Senior, Debbie, and we're attempting to make our film to tell our story. That's what we hope that people will receive. That what we have and what we're attempting to do moving forward is moving forward. And a lot of negativity that was attached to things in the past is in the past for us. And anyone who, knows us personally, what you see is what you get, man. I'm not, talking about you, talking to you in a certain way when I greet you, and then denying someone else's right to speak or tell their truth, with a different face. I have one. So you can research back to the 40 years I've done in prison. The only thing I've ever encouraged someone to do is to strengthen themselves.
Thank you.
So,
Appreciate that.
so ask, go to do your research then, and the conversations you have concerning our family is that, first of all, if we feel that something is wrong, you can hear about it from us. It's not going to be in the press. It's not going to be third hand, second hand. It's going to be from us, and, if we're not comfortable with the setting, then we're leaving the set. And the set that we're now doing is what we're going to watch this evening.
Thank you for that. I know we're right up on time, but Louis wanted to ask a question. He had emailed after we had circulated the questions to the panelists, and we would really love to provide space for you to ask that question before we start closing things up.
Oops.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I wanted, Debbie, Mike Sr., Mike Jr., media has been so important to the MOVE organization and in defining the MOVE organization, and you are now all making work. What if you care to share what is the work now? What is the media work that you might consider making? What is the story that is there a story, and if so, what is that story? If you care to share that that you think needs to be made?
Well, I think that for myself personally, this is all uncomfortable for me as well, and I apologize actually to all of you because this is not something that we would have done in the face of the media or the way things are being done. I believe that a lot of um, things need to stay a certain way within your family. Now, I'm not talking about extremely wrong things, but the point is we wouldn't have never done nothing this way before. But since it is this way now, we, in my feelings, that we are obligated and to speak on things and to hold accountable whomever is accountable. And just my link to the organization, of course, I have to take responsibility as well. So although I've been away for 40 years, I still have to take my own accountability to what I'm responsible for. As far as the media go, though, I think that Mike Senior and I have always kind of planned to want to talk about a lot of the things that we did like or didn't like, or things that we would rather have done, or maybe things that have gotten in the way. But in the wake of recent developments, I think that for me personally, I might feel the need to explore that deeper. I guess I want to say it really in defense of myself because I don't well I don't like things as being said, and I don't like feeling a part of something that I knew nothing about. So that's for me, honestly. I don't take too kindly to that. However, still trying to keep it like, I don't want to, I don't want to be gossiping and blasting and, getting into a whole bicker back and forth kind of thing. That's not what I want to do. However, what you're saying, Louis, I think is important as far as the media and, filmmaking, that possibly we could explore that avenue in doing and saying the things that we want to say and saying the things that we feel we need to say at this point. So I think that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, and not to just say something else, but I'm not denying anyone's right to move forward however they see fit. If this helps them in a way that helps them with the trauma that they experience, more power to them. This helps us actually making the film and continuing on with the filmmaking that we've been given the opportunity to do is cathartic for us. And the trauma we've experienced from incarceration and confrontation, and that's been our lives for the last nearly 50 years. So in a way, this is this is therapeutic for us actually. And getting to tell our story and getting to have conversations both comfortable and uncomfortable. I think that's part of it. But I want to say that it's also a thing of we can't do this in someone else's time and space. We have our own we have our own method in dealing with the trauma that we've suffered. So the way we do it, someone thinks that we're not moving fast enough, or we're not speaking on specific things enough. If we're not, whatever, then, that's not our problem. We're going through a process of trying to speak on things as we get to it, and things, that we want to impart, not that others want, imparted from us. You know, now if people have a problem with that, then I don't know what, how to address that. But the things that I'm
Can I
interested in
cut? Can
having
I cut in for a
conversations. I'm not interested in. Huh? What you say, Mike?
say? Can I cut in? Can I cut in?
Sure, sure,
Thank you. Um,
sure.
I wanted to say that I think it's important for people to understand that there's a lot of stories within the move story, right? And so, like, what people hear usually is the most the most that people hear is the bombing, and then after that is this confrontation that sent people to jail and all of this. But like, I think, and by your side, that this is a story that people, unless you know the story of Mike and Debbie, you don't know that this even exists in Move. You don't even have a clue, an idea that this could be possible in Move. So I think for me, it's just about telling the stories. That's it, right? It's about opening people's eyes to a side that they never knew existed. It's about connecting with people on a level to let people know that, you know what, just like you are. We're not aliens from wherever. Just because we had dreadlocks in the 70s didn't mean that we were something other than human. So, and I think when people hear those stories, when they see these stories, it connects with them, and the people who didn't know it opens their eyes, and for the people who does know, I think it's refreshing for them to see a different view than what has been painted about us. So that's and recently we've gotten some really favorable press and stories, especially um, within the last few years, and I think that's helpful because, like, in 40 Years a Prisoner, it's just this guy trying to get his parents out of prison. And when people look at the video Fly Baby, guess what? This guy that was born in prison, when the cop said that they beat Delbert Africa and they took him to the hospital, but they should have taken him to the morgue, I bet that cop never knew or expected that, and possibly didn't even care that there was going to be this kid who was affected by that for all his life. And, someone needs to tell that story. And hopefully, when other people see these stories, especially if they're police officers, they maybe they won't be so quick to jump on somebody's head. And for the bystanders, maybe they won't be so quick to blame Move. For the media, maybe they won't be so quick to besmirch, right? And for Move, perhaps we can learn how to do things differently in some ways too, because this is not just a one-sided thing. These stories are important for everyone to learn from, including us.
Thank you so much
Great cut-in.
for.
Yep.
I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Mike Senior?
No, I just said great cut-in. He said he
Oh
wanted to
yeah,
cut in.
that
I
was,
said great cut-in.
and I just want to
That
say, what's that? Okay. I want to appreciate each of you, Mike Senior, Mike Junior, Debbie, in particular, for your willingness to be open in this fashion, through like what are clearly still like traumatizing and re-traumatizing experiences, and using your stories to heal, and to also heal us, right? The larger us. And I did not want us to leave this space without acknowledging something very, very important that happened this week. We can't have a panel on the first week of August and not acknowledge a very special someone had a birthday this week on August 4th, Debbie Africa. And so and we are celebrating with you all this week and this month. And so happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you, Krystal and everybody. Yes, I had a wonderful birthday. Wonderful.
I just want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists, for the co-moderators, for bringing such care and vulnerability and really like deep thought and honesty about these topics. I want to thank Aisha Shahida Simmons, whose work has been really important for us. And, you know, since we've been evoking the energy of Toni K. Bambara here, it reminds me of how she talks about the duty of cultural workers being to reassemble cultural memory, right? And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're inheriting these fragments of memory and these really broken and troubled institutions or failing institutions by design. And this is the work of reassembling that, of world making. And so I thank you for practicing that. So much love to each of you. We're so grateful at BlackStar to have you as part of our community. And thank you to the audience for listening in. Good night, everybody.